Yes, hello again to everybody out there. Welcome back to part 2 of the bikes in the paddock from the Revival Scramble 2024. So we're going to get straight into our next machine, and to kick this part 2 off, we're going to take a look at this beautiful YZ490 Yamaha belonging to Ken Muir. So as you can see, this particular YZ Yamaha isn't your normal run-of-the-mill monoshock bike. This particular machine here was all built by Gary Sr., and it was all done for Mike Brown to ride at the famous Farleigh Castle MXDN event. But certainly this is a very special machine indeed. Of course, it's an old YZ490 monoshock that's been converted to a twin shock configuration, and I know that a lot of you YZ purists out there hate these kind of conversions that take a perfectly good monoshock YZ Yamaha and then chop it up to make one of these twin shock racers. But this bike here has certainly been very well done and quite tasteful in my opinion, and looks absolutely stunning as well. Now, Ken did tell me that this particular YZ engine was sent over to the USA to Tom Morgan, who did all of the engine work on this bike with the likes of a brand new liner and all the cylinder porting and head modifications, etc. And this is an absolute stonker of a two-stroke YZ power plant. And to complement that YZ motor, we also have this Jai SV expansion chamber. This exhaust here is certainly a work of art in its own right, and looks absolutely perfect alongside that YZ two-stroke reed valve motor. Now, most of this bike's design parameters with regards to the frame and engine and front suspension layout have all been more or less copied from the highly successful 1981 490 Myco, which, as you know, is still regarded as one of the best handling twin shock bikes of our time. And once again, no expense spared here at the back end of Ken's bike with these lovely Öhlins piggyback units. These are top class and will certainly complement that lovely alloy swing arm and rear end. Now, the fuel tank on this bike, although looks like it could be a plastic unit, this is actually a custom made alloy fuel tank that was specifically made for Mike Brown on this bike, and you can see the YZ490 Mike Brown graphics with the American flag emblazoned on the side there. But this is just a quick introduction to this lovely YZ twin shocker, because I've already penciled in a full feature on this bike so we can show you at a later date. But again, a lovely twin shock YZ Yamaha belonging to Ken Muir. And on the subject of the famous 490 Mega 2 Myco, this is Andrew Farr's lovely interpretation of that iconic twin shock bike from the 1980s, all done up, of course, in this blue livery. And it seems these days that you can have your Myco twin shockers in almost any colour of the rainbow, but this particular blue livery of Andy Farr's is certainly got that appeal as a twin shock racer, but another very good example of this iconic race machine. And you can see on Andrew's bike we have an alloy swing arm on the back as opposed to the original steel item that would have been fitted to this bike in 1981. And sitting inside the chassis, of course, is the beastie itself, the mighty Mega 490 piston port two-stroke motor. Now, you don't need me to tell you how awesome these engines were back in the day and still are, in fact. And you can see Andy's got a replacement ignition cover there, a nice CNC alloy unit, which will replace the plastic item that used to be fitted to this engine. But the big Bing carburetor still pumping in that fuel to that superb 490 motor. But fitting these alloy swing arms to the back of your 490 seems to be quite common these days. These are, of course, not as strong as the original steel items. In fact, I've heard a few guys who have fitted aluminium swing arms to their bikes, and they've removed them and went back to the much stronger steel items, which, of course, are not prone to fatigue or cracking like these lighter, softer alloy units. But up at the front of Andrew's bike, we have the standard stock front suspension forks. These, even for 1981, were still pretty good suspension units, and that's why a lot of guys still use these micro forks even in this modern day. And this front brake backplate is again another replacement CNC machined item. And as you can see, Andrew's decided to go for a pair of white power piggyback shocks to fit on the back of his 490. But these white power units are certainly very good quality, and they do provide the rider with quite a lot of adjustment with regards the suspension's rebound and compression settings. So I can see exactly why the twin shock guys love to fit these white power piggybacks to their old Micos, because these, as I said, are excellent quality units. And this bike of Andrew's is another one of the machines you can see taking part in the racing footage when we get around to posting that, which will, of course, be my next video here on my channel. And you can see Andrew and his lovely Michael taking part in the Twin Shock Open class. So make sure that you retune to CDB TV to take a look at that. But a lovely interpretation of one of those iconic 490 Mega 2 Michaels from 1981. That's a bike built by Andrew Farr. So next up, we're going to take a very quick look at Keith Burst's 1982 Honda XR500. And if you're into your four-stroke thumpers, you may enjoy having a quick look around Keith's bike, powered, of course, by that almost unbreakable XR500 Honda. The single cylinder, of course, but with the twin port cylinder head with those exhaust pipes that go down either side of the bike. Now, with regards the chassis on this bike, I'm not completely convinced if this is a proper JBR chassis. It certainly looks quite similar, but as you can see there, the twin header pipes on that big XR500 that run down either side of the bike. Other XR500s do have the 2-into-1 exhaust pipe that joins in the middle and go to a single tailpipe at the rear, but looks like Keith has stuck with the traditional twin pipes on his particular XR. At the back end, you can see those very slim tailpipes. Normally these 4-stroke XR500s have quite bigger tail cones here at the back underneath the seat, but these stainless steel pipes look very neat and tidy at the back of this bike. So I expect there will be some nice braps will emit from these pipes when that XR500 gets fired up. But you certainly can't go wrong with these big JBR XR500 powered twin shockers. If you're into your old 4-stroke bikes and you want something that's tough and reliable, then they don't come much tougher than these big Honda 4-bangers. And also on the back end of Keith's bike, you can just catch a glimpse there of those Fox air shocks. Those old Fox air shocks were, I think these were pioneered way back in the 1970s, and they're certainly a lot more unconventional than your spring and gas type affairs, but nevertheless they still worked quite well. So there you have it, another 4-stroke thumper that's just about to take part in this year's 2024 Revival Scramble. That's Keith Burst's 1982 Honda 500. Next up, we're going to take a look at some of the lovely Greaves bikes that were on display, and these up-and-coming bikes that you're about to see were taking part in the Greaves Riders Dave Harper Championship, and a nice collection of British-made old Greaves bikes there, mainly Greaves Griffin machines, of course, but and again, very nicely turned out. But as I remember from filming on the day, the 3 red bikes were 250 and 380 Griffins, and this bike here in the foreground with the silver tank was a Challenger framed bike with a Griffin engine in the frame. So as far as I can remember, the bike on the right hand side there is a Greaves Griffin 380 with the twin header pipes coming out of the barrel there, and the bike in the middle is a 250 machine, and all 2 of these bikes belong to Jordan Ansell, and the number 788 machine there in the middle belongs to Alan Greaves, which is a 1969 380 Griffin. So this pair of bikes here on the right there, the 380 Greaves Griffin and the 250 on the left, are both bikes belonging to Jordan Ansell, and Jordan will be racing these in the Greaves Dave Harper Championship in the racing. But a nicely turned out 250 there with that trademark Greaves barrel and head with the big massive cooling fins, which of course was a bit of a trademark on many of these Greaves scramblers with their big barrels and cooling fins, because a lot of these Greaves bikes were exported to the USA to be used in desert racing, and that's another one of the factors that Greaves made these engines with big cooling fins to try and dissipate the heat when these bikes were used in desert racing. And this is another nice 250 belonging to Jordan Ansell, this time of course with the matte black painted barrel and cylinder head. But certainly Greaves did build some fantastic road and these scrambles bikes as well during the time, and these Griffin racers were very popular in the 1960s and early 70s. But of course, prior to building these off-roaders, Greaves were also responsible for those 3-wheeled disabled transporters that they call the Invicars, and Greaves did very well out of that government contract, and that was of course up until they were eventually outlawed on safety grounds, and that was when Bert Greaves then diversified into building these off-road motorcycles. And the Challenger and the Griffin racers were certainly without doubt a pair of their most popular models. And in this shot here you can see the 380 Griffin bike with the twin port header pipes coming up over the top of the engine and then connecting onto a single tailpipe at the rear. But many of these old Greaves bikes had fiberglass fuel tanks and side panels back in the day, and I've no reason to believe that these side panels here on Jordan's bike are not the real deal, but it's certainly great to see these old classics back here at the Revival Scramble. So this number 788 bike, as I said, is a Challenger frame, but it has a Greaves Griffin engine inside the chassis, and also at the front end of this bike you can see that it has that alloy front frame down tube. So all of you young guys out there who think that motocross bikes and their alloy frames all began in the 1990s, then think again, because Greaves in the 1960s were using these alloy front frame down tubes on their bikes. So these Greaves bikes were certainly pioneers using alloy as part of the bike's chassis. But certainly a unique bike, and I think this is one of the first Greaves bikes that I've seen with a Challenger frame and the Griffin engine, but certainly a nice looking bike from Alan Greaves. And remember, you can see all of this collection of Greaves bikes in the forthcoming racing footage when these bikes here and many more like it will be taking part in the Dave Harper Championship, which will be their second round of 2024. So next up, we're going to take a quick glance at a couple of nice Michaels that Peter Williamson brought along. I think both of these bikes are 400cc machines, but quite nice looking, apart of course from the black wheels. But we'll just skip past that particular item at the moment, but certainly a nice pair of old German Michaels, not original of course, but as I said in many of my other videos, there's not a lot of these Michaels these days still in their original bits and pieces, but this bike here is certainly well turned out. This is Peter's other machine. It looks like maybe a 1977 bike or thereabouts, one of those Adolf wheel machines with a replacement exhaust and of course those YSS piggyback shocks. But a nice pair of Michaels there from Peter Williamson. But as you can gather, there were plenty old Michaels on display at this year's Revival Scramble, and this is Martin Snape's MSR S1 250. The S1s, of course, were built by Michael only here in the UK, and it looks like Martin's renamed his bike the MSR S1, which I assume stands for Martin Snape Racing. But these Michael only machines used, I think it was the 81 frame, and they slotted in the much later 1982 or 83 250 reed valve engine. But were pretty good bikes for their time, and this one of Martin's is certainly in quite good nick. But for sure, another nice 250 Michael to look out for when we get around to posting that all-important racing footage. But a nice twin-shock racer there from Martin Snape. And just to keep the Michael theme going, this is Stephen Morgan's 1977 440. This is not a fully original bike, of course, but very tastefully turned out with those Dutch Reiger shocks there on the back. It looks like it's had a replacement front brake and back plate as well, all done up in that nice CNC machined alloy. Here at the business end of the bike, it's the 440 piston port motor, and I actually had the later version of this 440 in my 1980 twin shock Micro that I used to race about 150 years ago, but I always found the 440 bike to be a very user-friendly machine, and it was just not as violent, of course, as the bigger 490. A nice little sticker there on this alloy tailpipe. Weed every day. I don't know if that's regarding Stephen's incontinence, but it could mean something else, of course. But a lovely bike, though. It's a 1977 440, as we said, with some upgraded parts in it. But again, look out for Stephen on the track when we see the racing footage. Right, next up it's the turn of Ian Knight's lovely Honda CR250 from 1973, another cracking looking Elsinore. Now these little 73 or even 74 250 Honda Elsinores were reputed to be Honda's very first ever purpose-built motocross machine before Honda introduced this bike to the world. Most of their bikes were really converted road machines, but this was Honda's first ever assault on the motocross world with this purpose-built 250 racer. And you may remember that the late Steve McQueen was seen riding one of these 250 Elsies in that biopic documentary way back in the 1970s on Any Sunday. And after Steve McQueen was seen riding one of these bikes, Honda were selling them before they'd even manufactured them. Such was the demand for this iconic little two-stroke racer. And Honda, of course, made a smaller 125 version of this 250, which they say was more popular than this bigger 250, but both the 125 and 250s have now gained iconic status in the motocross world, and this bike here of Ian Knight's is quite close to an original machine, but it's got different bars and a pair of bar risers and different triple clamps on there at the front. But we still have the iconic Honda alloy fuel tank with, of course, that green stripe down the centre. And I'm pretty sure it was the later 1974 or 75 bike that had the red stripe that ran down the centre of this fuel tank. Now here at the front of Ian's bike, it still has what looks like the stock standard Honda LC front forks, which for their time in the early 1970s were pretty good suspension considering the time period that these bikes were raced in. And you can see they had the old school drum brakes at the front as well, but the wheels, of course, are replacements. And here we have the stock standard front CR Honda LC front mud flap to help deflect some of that mud from the rider's face. So this is quite a nice original touch on Ian's bike. And how cool is this? Ian's also got a nice sticker there in memory of my old friend Ian Robertson, who we sadly lost back in 2019. And Ian's racing number at that time, of course, was number 100. Also on Ian's little LC, you can see that he's removed the original steel tubular swing arm and fitted one of these much more popular alloy units. Riders did tend to remove the old steel swing arms and replace them with these much lighter alloy parts. But again, another beautiful example of an iconic bike from the 1970s. That's Ian Knight's Honda 250 Elsinore. But briefly, these are a couple of nice Can-Ams that I came across as I was passing. Now, this is Dave Alderson's 1981 Can-Am machines. I think one of them was a 360 and the other was a 250, but I certainly don't see too many Can-Ams taking part in classic racing these days, and these two belonging to David was two absolute crackers. I think this one here was the 250 of the two bikes, so a couple of nice old Can-Ams there for you. Both bikes fitted, of course, with that unbreakable two-stroke Rotax motor. And both of these bikes certainly look in quite good original condition. I don't see too many pattern or replacement parts on both of these bikes, but here we have another shot of that Rotax motor with, of course, Bombardier stamped on that ignition casing, who were in fact the owners of Rotax at that time. But a couple of lovely old Can-Ams from Dave Alderson. But moving swiftly along, we now take a look at Ryan Ireland's 1980 Honda CR250 Red Rocket. Another absolute beauty of a twin-shock racer. Not an original bike, of course, but this is not only a fast bike, but it certainly has the looks as well. And look out for Ryan on the track in this fantastic little red rocket. But these Honda Red Rockets are a bit like the old Maicos in this modern day. There are not a lot of standard or original parts on them, because riders tend to put upgraded parts or better quality components on them, rather than trying to source all of the original bits and pieces. But these Honda Red Rockets do make a good choice for a club racer's bike, because there are so many upgraded and original parts that you can still buy for these bikes. So that makes them quite a good choice if you want to get yourself into twin shock racing. And here at the back of Ryan's bike, you can see he's also had a replacement alloy tailpipe as well. But here's the little beastie itself, the Honda Red Rocket engine. Of course, originally this motor would have been completely covered in that lovely fire engine red paint, but I think Ryan's still using the stock standard Honda forks on his bike. These have probably been upgraded inside with different internals just to beef them up that little bit more. And also at the back, it's a pair of nice Swedish-made Öhlins piggyback shocks. So these shocks will certainly be a lot better than the original Honda items. Here at the back again, we have a replacement, what looks like a CNC machined alloy brake backplate to replace that Honda original item. And also here at the back we have that alloy swing arm, which of course will replace what would have been the stock standard steel item. Also, both wheels on Ryan's bike are replacement SM Pro alloy rims. Thankfully, all nicely polished up in their alloy original metal and not painted black as some people tend to do to these poor old classics these days, but another belter of a 250 Honda Rocket. But you should be able to keep tabs on Ryan and this CR250 Honda when he takes to the track, because most of the time this bike will be running at the front of the pack, so look out for Ryan on his 250 Red Rocket. In the background there you can just see that number 56 bike. That's Tony Barnes's big CCM, and that's another bike to look out for when we get around to the racing footage. So there you have it, a lovely red rocket from the 1980s belonging to Ryan Ireland. Now, of course, we can't conclude our Paddock walkabout without taking a look at Cecil Pearson's Rickman Jap Scramblers, a collection of bikes that we've featured many times here on my video channel. And these very unique bikes are mainly made up from using 1960s Rickman frames with, of course, that 1930s Jap or John Alfred Prestwich engine inside the chassis. Now, Cecil makes the journey from his hometown in Northern Ireland to this Kendal Classic Revival Scramble each year, and he usually brings along at least half a dozen of these Rickman Scramblers, and that chap there in the back, number 26, is James Thompson, getting his bike all ready for taking to the track. But when you look at these old vintage Scramblers, they certainly have that old school look about them, but don't be fooled by their appearance, because these bikes are very quick on the track, as you're shortly to find out. And that number 111 and number 11 bike there is actually a Harry Stitt framed machine with the Jap engine in the chassis. So this number 111 bike is actually a chassis that was designed and built by young Harry Stitt, and he made these chassis specifically for Cecil's Jap engines. Now, at the last count, I'm pretty sure that Cecil had 7 of these Rickman Jap Scramblers, and as I said, 2 of the bikes with the Harry Stitt frame. And in the background there you can see 3 of Cecil's riders, James Thompson, Adrian Lappin, and of course David Wilson there on the right. But I'm sure you're already aware that these 4-stroke single-cylinder Jap engines don't run on regular gas, but these engines run on the much more volatile methanol fuel. But look out for this unique collection of Jap Scramblers when we get round to posting all the racing footage. So that concludes our Paddock walkabout for 2024. Now, coming up next, of course, we will have all of the racing action from the 2024 Westmoreland Revival Scramble. Now, we have 24 races to feature here on my channel, so we'll probably divide that up into possibly 4 separate video clips. So please return to CDB TV or even subscribe, so that way you don't miss out on what's coming up next here on Classic Dirt Bike TV.